What's going on, guys? This is the Red Rogue and I hope you're all doing well today. In this video, we'll be discussing the recently announced tier sets for the first patch of Dragonflight, which will consist of Season 1 Mythic Plus dungeons, Season 1 PvP, and the Vault of the Incarnates raid tier. At the time of putting this video together, these tier sets are not even on beta yet to test, so this is entirely a speculatory sort of video, as well as a way to share my thoughts and opinions on the 3 rogue set effects that we'll be able to use in the future. Once the sets are actually in the game, I will likely do a follow-up video, but for now, we're just going to talk about the idea of tier sets and the design logic that went into these first patch bonuses that we'll be getting. For any of us who have played WoW for a long time, you likely already know what tier sets are. For those who haven't though, a quick explanation. Tier sets are basically a series of bonus effects that you earn once you acquire and equip certain pieces of armor. Generally speaking, these tier set pieces will drop from raid bosses, but in more recent patches they have a chance to come from your weekly reward chest in the Great Vault, and with the Creation Catalyst introduced in Shadowlands, you can actually convert items into tier pieces as well. The newest iteration of the Creation Catalyst, now called the Inspiration Catalyst, will serve the same purpose in Dragonflight, and will allow PvPers and Mythic Plus players the opportunity to earn tier armor without having to raid. Now, going back in time a bit and looking at recent expansions, and I use the term recent very loosely because it's been about 6 to 8 years since we've had tier sets in raids, generally the first raid of any expansion is not a source of tier sets. The last time this was the case was with patch 5.0.4, which was the launch of Mists of Pandaria and included the tier 14 armor sets whose pieces dropped in both the Terrace of Endless Springs and the Heart of Fear raid. Now, to make all of us veteran players feel really old and to make sure you've taken your back medicine today, that was over 10 years ago at this point. No expansion since Mists of Pandaria has had tier come from the first patch, so this is a very large shift in the design logic and reward schema that Blizzard has used for literally over half of WoW's existence. Now, before we get too much into design logic and player power progression systems and game design garbage like that, I'm just going to read off what each rogue spec is going to receive for their set bonuses in the first patch of Dragonflight, and then dig into what I think of each of them as well as some other related topics. Since we're just going to go in alphabetical order, because why not, we're going to start with Assassination, and we have the following bonuses. The 2 set bonus. Envenom also increases your weapon poison damage by 10%. And the 4 set is when your weapon poisons deal direct damage, you have a 50% chance to gain septic wounds, increasing your bleed damage by 2% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. Next, we have Outlaw's set bonus effects. For the 2 set, Dispatch will increase the damage of your next Sinister Strike or Ambush by 20% per combo point spent. And for the 4 set, half-cost uses of Pistol Shot granted by Sinister Strike increase the damage of your next Dispatch by 50%. And lastly, Subtlety. For the 2 set bonus, Eviscerate and Black Powder will increase the damage and critical strike chance of your next Backstab, Shadow Strike, or Shuriken Storm by 2% per combo point spent. And the 4 set is Backstab, Shadow Strike, and Shuriken Storm critical hits will increase the damage of Eviscerate and Rupture by 15%, and the damage of Black Powder by 8% for 6 seconds. I'll leave these all on screen for just a little bit so you can pause and look them over, and when talking about a specific bonus or spec, I'll just show that part by itself. Now, if you're watching this channel, then there is a good chance you main a rogue and have a rough idea of how each spec's rotation and playstyle works, at least in its current iteration as far as Shadowlands goes. Compared to our current tier set in Shadowlands, or even just any of the most recent sets, and I use that term extremely loosely since Legion was the last expansion to include tier sets up until now, these set effects probably don't sound all that great. Looking at Assassinations first, we have Envenom buffing weapon poisons by 10% while the Envenom buff is active, which is that part that increases your poison application chance after you apply Envenom, and the duration of that is based on how many combo points you spend. This means that your weapon poisons in both single target and multi-target situations will do more damage as long as you're casting Envenom on a consistent basis. However, Envenom isn't really cast that often in AoE situations, at least as of right now in Shadowlands, since you're going to be using a lot of your combo points and energy to refresh Crimson Tempest and to apply Rupture to enemies instead, so this effect probably won't be quite as useful except in like lower target count or single target situations. This set bonus does imply a gain to the Dragon Tempered Blade's Capstone talent, which gives Assassination the ability to apply 2 lethal poisons to their weapons instead of just 1. though it's too early to say if that alone is enough of a reason to run Dragon Tempered Blades over Kingsbane in single target. In multi-target though, this is definitely a more obvious gain, but you still would have to use Envenom at least enough to refresh that buff so you can keep your poison damage up. For the 4 set, any direct damage caused by your poisons will have a 50% chance to give you a stacking 2% boost to bleed damage, maxing out at 10% and lasting 8 seconds. Again, this does favor Dragon Tempered Blades a bit, since the more poisons you have to apply, the more easily you can keep this bleed damage boost rolling constantly because you're having more poisons hit, which means more direct damage dealt by poisons. In theory, in multi-target situations, this should be very easy to get stacks of, since Fan of Knives does apply poisons at your normal chance rate. But even in single target, with the quick auto attack speed of 2 daggers and slice and dice up, it would be feasible to say that this effect should have a very, very high uptime as long as you're constantly able to hit something. Overall, not too bad, and it sounds like some pretty simple ways to get free damage. Next, we'll get into Outlaw set effects. Outlaw can have up to 7 combo points if you take both iterations of Deeper Stratagem on the class and spec-specific tree. So a full combo point dispatch will make your next Sinister Strike or Ambush do 140% increased damage. Neither of these 2 moves are a massive amount of our overall damage, but both of them are affected by Blade Flurry, so this 2-set bonus will have an impact on our single target and multi-target damage, which is probably my favorite thing about the Rogue set bonuses, as all of them have at least some influence in any target count situation that you're in. There are a number of talents that buff both Sinister Strike and Ambush, such as the Heavy Hitter talent, which gives a 10% boost to combo point generator damage, the Deadly Precision talent, which gives up to a 10% boost to critical strike chance of combo point generators, and the Lethality talent, which gives up to a 20% boost to critical hit damage of combo point generators too. Though unlikely, it would be nice if the 2-set damage boost applied to the extra hits for Sinister Strike and Ambush that they're both able to proc based on your talent choices, but the game tracks those as separate spell IDs, so I find it very unlikely that they'll have any improvement thanks to this 2-set bonus, sadly. Regardless, a nice and simple to use effect proc that should flow naturally with our rotation. The 4-set helps ensure that we use our opportunity procs, because using an opportunity pistol shot proc increases the damage of our next dispatch by 50%. I kinda dig this effect since it helps reinforce the importance of using procs. With the current iteration of Shadowlands like Venthyr Blunderbuss stuff, it's kinda botched that all up due to the way our tier and legendaries all work together, and this shouldn't be that hard to keep track of, though a weak aura will be a nice helpful reminder, and the best part is this impacts both single target and AoE, which is always a win in my book. Lastly, we have Subtlety. This is probably the most interesting of the bunch, as it helps to give Subtlety access to its priority damage rotation, or improve its AoE, or just buff single target in general. Subtlety has access to a total of 7 combo points if spec'd into both versions of Deeper Stratum on the class tree and the spec tree, giving up to a 14% increase to the damage and critical strike chance of either Backstab, Shadow Strike, or Shuriken Storm whenever you use a 7 combo point Eviscerate or Black Powder. And while the tooltip doesn't mention it, Gloomblade does replace Backstab in this equation if you talent into it, which can do a pretty beefy amount of damage, especially with the Lingering Shadow talent, which makes your Gloomblades or Backstabs do up to 100% more damage as Shadow once you leave Shadow Dance, plus all the modifier talents that improve magic damage and shadow damage across Subtlety's tree. Regardless, a 14% damage and crit chance boost to every couple GCD's worth of generators is not bad by any means. And for Shuriken Storm, this also means you're more likely to apply Find Weakness to all your enemies with that heightened crit chance. The 4-set makes any of the critical hits from your generators of the 2-set increase the damage of Eviscerate and Rupture by 15% and Black Powder by 8% for 6 seconds, meaning if you need more priority damage on a target in cleave scenarios, then you can amp up your Rupture and Eviscerates consistently thanks to all those targets you can spray with Shuriken Storms and likely Shuriken Tornado as well, since that talent just dumps out Shuriken Storms automatically, and you're very likely to crit at least a couple times out of several multi-target situation hits. The 4-set is less impactful for AoE since it's a mere 8% on Black Powder damage, but there are quite a lot of damage amplification buffs across Subtlety's talent tree to make good use of these gains anyhow. Overall, this is a very flexible tier set bonus, so kudos to whoever put this one together. Now, none of these effects sound super crazy, insanely OP, like some prior tiers have felt or at least seemed, and that is an intentional design of the first patch of Dragonflight, which is something I want to explain before we go further into anything else. With all of the new build choices and talent options Blizzard wants us to mess around with, the goal of these tier sets was to make them as non-invasive as possible to your talent choices. This does result in some, or rather most of the sets being kind of bland or simple or boring or however you want to put it, especially when you look back at Legion or Shadowlands where tier from some classes looks close to like a 20 to 30% DPS gain. In comparison, I bet most Dragonflight tier sets are going to be in the range of like 5 to 9-ish%. That's literally just a guess, but with how minimal most of the effects seem, I wouldn't be surprised if I was pretty close. However, when looking at Dragonflight and Blizzard's design logic, you sometimes need to take a step back and gauge the current state of WoW in general. Now, while Wrath of the Lich King was released almost 14 years ago, the release of Wrath Classic lines up very neatly with Dragonflight, being only a couple months apart. While it seems like there's this massive schism in the community where you can't play Wrath Classic and Retail and Dragonflight at the same time, yeah, I have been. I've been playing all three. I've actually been playing less Retail than usual because of beta testing and because Wrath Classic actually is kind of fun in its own way. Regardless though, in the first couple months of Wrath Classic, people that have played it are going to be in the first phase of raiding, which includes Tier 7's raid tokens. Something you'll likely notice if you play both of them like I do is that a lot of older tier set effects are, how do I put it nicely since Wrath is supposedly the best expansion ever or whatever? Well, they're minor at best. Like, here are two different set bonuses. Can you guess which one is from Wrath of the Lich King and which is from Dragonflight? Honestly, they're pretty similar sounding if I say so myself, and either of them sound like they could be in Wrath to me. And ironically, the one that's slightly better sounding is the one from Retail, though it isn't that much better sounding in my opinion. Now, whether the design team for Retail intentionally took some inspiration from Phase 1 Wrath Classic tier sets is not confirmed either way. If you look back and forth between several of them though, you might see some trending patterns or, at the very least, some uncanny similarities. Personally, I think it was done with the intent of drawing parallels between old elements of WoW with the modern era of gaming, while also allowing for set effects that don't force players into overly specific builds. Getting dozens and dozens of shiny new talent combinations would be pretty awful if you couldn't even attempt to mess around with them due to a tier set being so mandatorily covering one part of your tree. I feel like, honestly, we could have gone without tier in the first patch of the expansion, just to see exactly how our classes and specs feel without any outside impact at all. But Blizzard is handling things a lot differently in Dragonflight than they have in many of the most recent expansions, so this may just be a precedent that they're trying to set for future design iterations in WoW. Unfortunately for them, it seems like a majority of really vocal community figures have basically just laughed at these set bonuses because they're so minimal or simple or feel that they're insulted by them, I guess, or whatever, I don't know. Thankfully, I know that the loudest voice doesn't necessarily mean it speaks for the most people, as I gave my peace of mind a few days ago on this topic, and a lot of folks from the channel agreed that the tier sets being more minimalistic is a good thing. Now, Blizzard has said in their initial tier announcement that they aren't getting rid of tier sets that could spice up or alter gameplay or rotations, but that this first round was meant to be a, hey look, tier is here to stay kind of thing, which is entirely fine in my book, as I do enjoy tier sets. People are going to have a lot of stuff to mess around with and builds to think up, so being pigeonholed or put into a mental block over thinking what is or isn't allowed to be used literally the second you get access to all these new talents would be a horrible choice just because of an armor set that's going to go away after 5 or 6 months. Anyways folks, I think that about wraps up my initial thoughts on the 3 rogue tier sets as well as the general concept of tier moving into Dragonflight and the potential thought process that might have been done behind all of it. I hope this video was helpful or informative to you. If so, please consider leaving a like or letting me know what tier set sounds the most useful to you. As always, my appreciation and gratitude to all of my viewers and especially my patrons, who all help make these Shiba Shenanigans possible. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the Red Rogue, and I'll see you guys around.